And what we're talking about now, just in my opinion, is creating a special group based on identity. So I want to give you some hypothetical situations that have happened across our country that could happen here in Perkiomen Valley. Let's assume we retire our locker room and bathroom policy. And let's assume next week that a student who is religious and might be of the Orthodox Jewish faith, I'm Jewish, or might be of the Muslim faith, and they wear a headscarf. And in their religion, they're not allowed to take off their headscarf in front of a man. Well, that's how they identify. That's their religion. That's how they identify. We're going to now tell them that they need to go in a private stall, because if they're in a men's room or boys' room, there could be someone from the opposite gender. So if they would come to the administration and say, hey, I can't use the bathroom during second period because in the female bathroom there happens to be a trans female and I can't take off my headscarf and wash my face, our response is going to be, well, we take some identifiable traits higher over others. That's one aspect of the identity crisis that we could be facing. We have elevators in our school district. Obviously, we have elevators in our school district because we have some students that can't take steps, maybe because they have a disability, maybe because they broke a leg, and it takes them time to get from class to class. We afford them the opportunity to leave class early, if need be, to get to their class, because we don't have 9 elevators. We don't have as many elevators as we do have walking shafts for students to walk to and from class. We don't have we don't have curb spots in every single door entrance in our school district that makes it accessible to everybody, but we do afford accommodations, some, not all. But what we're talking about now is creating, based off of one identifiable trait, all accommodations. And we're picking one identifiable trait over others, and I don't necessarily think that's a fair thing to do, because that creates discrimination. We're saying that this one identifiable trait is more important to us than other identifiable traits. We talk about how changing the locker room policy could affect sports. But first, before I go to that, we'll talk about the new AR. The original AR that was discussed at the policy meeting cited what a transgender student was and what a non-transgender student was, and that's no longer there. But what's most interesting in the new AR and in the OMB information presented from the administration is that they too are okay with some discrimination. The fact sheet, based off of the new Title IX regulations that were finally sent to OMB, are different than what people thought they might have been. Over the last 50 years, since Title IX of the Educational Amendments of 1972 was signed into law, it paved way for tremendous strides in access to education, scholarship, athletics for millions of students across the country. In spite of the progress, women and girls still face fundamental barriers to equal education opportunities. In spite of the historic progress, women and girls still face fundamental barriers. I'll move on. The department proposed regulations will strengthen protections for LGBTQI students by classifying Title IX's protection against discrimination based on sex to apply discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identification. And I agree with that 1,000%, because the stories that Dr. Russell used to tell me about of things that happened in the 70s and 80s and 90s in our school district, based off of how someone looked, are embarrassing. And I'm glad that we're going to put ourselves in a position that that would not happen. But it's very interesting. The proposed regulations would clarify Title IX's prohibition on discrimination based on sex applies to discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. They would make it clear that preventing someone from participating in school programs and activities consistent with their gender identity would cause harm in violation of Title IX. But it doesn't have a period. It has a comma, except in some limited areas set out in statute or regulation. And who, my fellow board members, does that, since the federal government and the state government has abdicated their responsibility to handle hard issues of the day? Well, our Constitution in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania says we handle that. And we are allowed, except in some limited areas, to set out statute and regulations, which is specifically what policy 720 did. It set out a regulation. Now, what's most interesting is the Department of Education has decided to put a pause. The department plans to issue separate notice proposing rulemakings to address whether or how the department should amend Title IX regulations to address students' eligibility to participate on a particular male or female athletics team. I guess they deem it's okay to discriminate just a smidge. So the question really comes down to, what exactly are we doing? The federal government clearly doesn't know what they're doing. The courts are all over the place because there's vagueness in the policies that were sent to the OBM. They're saying right here, except in some limited areas set out in statute or regulations. They're saying right here again that they're not sure how they're going to handle sports. If we just remove the policy, gone, we know that tomorrow someone could apply to our House principal, and because the PIAA says it's up to the House principal, they could add a trans student on an opposite gendered team. Some of us think that's okay, and some of us don't. But it's our job to set the policy, not to rip it up, not to get rid of it and go to vagueness. And when I mean vagueness, because we're going off of policy 103 that in the authority states gender identification, but in the definition doesn't state. Now, I'm not a lawyer, nor am I a judge, but I can certainly see where someone forgot to copy and paste something into a couple spots in the policy, which sadly happens. So these are all interconnected. We're either going to discriminate a little bit, or we're not going to discriminate, or we're going to set statutes and regulations which we're allowed to do. Mr. Subers, may I ask you a question? Could the school board or any school board make a policy that states that men can't enter the building? Would that be allowed?
No, would not.
No, you would not allow that to happen. You would object at the meeting, correct? You would say,